And welcome to the Research Works podcast, brought to you in association with Curtin University and the Healthy Strides Foundation. Your hosts are Dr. Dana Poole and Dr. Ashley Thornton, and together we will interview world-leading researchers in the area of child health to support your practice in being more evidence-based.
The team at the Research Works podcast acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land and waters on which we live and work. We pay our respects to all First Nations peoples, elders past and present, and would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we record this podcast each week, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. We recognise their continued connection to this beautiful budja we call home.
Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Research Works podcast. We are now midway through our second season.
Oh my goodness. Time really flies, doesn't it? I cannot believe that we are halfway through already.
It's actually pretty frightening that we're halfway through a new year, which just seemed like it just started. But here we are.
Yeah.
Let's just go with that. Well, look, I think we've learned so much during the season. I know I definitely have. And now that we're through, halfway through the season, we thought it'd be a great opportunity just to have a bit of a breather and chat about some of the episodes that we've already had.
Yeah, we thought we might do, a little bit of a review and some reflections on what we've talked about and what we've learned and some of the kind of key implications for practice that everyone out there listening can kind of take away and hopefully start implementing into, what they're doing and who they're working with. So I think it's really useful to flesh those kinds of ideas out because, like we said, it's about connecting all the dots. And when we sat down and looked at all the episodes that we'd had this season, there really were lots of dots that could be connected.
They were, yes.
And, some real kind of clear key takeaways that can help transform our practice.
Yeah.
But just because we don't have a special guest today.
But we are special guests.
Doesn't mean we don't have the icebreakers.
Yay, cool.
You know how I feel about icebreakers. And I thought we could do something extra special today, given that it is you and I and producer Ed here together today. We could each do an icebreaker.
Oh, I love it. That's
3
cool.
icebreakers.
Okay.
Oh, that means I get one.
Yeah. Quick fire icebreaker round.
Okay.
Nice.
All right, my neurons are firing, thinking of questions.
So
okay.
I will start to give you two some time to think. Or you also have to think about an answer to my question, but also your own icebreaker question.
Okay.
So I'm really putting the pressure on
my neurons are definitely firing now.
So my question for you both is, what kind of reality show would you be on?
Oh, look, okay. I think a reality show that I would totally be on would be The Amazing Race.
Oh, good one.
Yeah, I reckon that'd be really cool. I could do that. But the only thing is I get quite travel sick. So when I do watch The Amazing Race and I see them traveling really quickly or like in really confined spaces, it makes me feel anxious because I know I'd be throwing up. And then I'd be like drugged up taking Quells, but then I'd be really, really drowsy.
Yeah.
And my mouth would be really dry from taking it. So I wouldn't be a great contestant, but it could be quite funny because I'll be throwing up so much.
Totally. And you'd have to use up all your travel money on sick bags.
Yeah, that's right. But I could imagine myself being on that. That's probably the most applicable one. That's a good question.
That would be fun, actually.
Yeah, it would be really cool.
Yeah. Ed, what about you?
Oh, I think I'd have to say the Amazing Race as well.
Copycat.
But so I'm gonna change my answer, and it's going to be funny because I can't sing to save my life. I have something very close to perfect pitch, but I can't sing. So I'd be one of those contestants on The Voice or like Australian Idol or something. Those auditions that they have when the people clearly don't have a chance to win the Idol or
you're
or
just
the
like
voice.
the padding around the real contestant.
Comedic element to the first part of the show. So I think that's where I'd make a name for myself.
You'd be that guy from The Voice.
Yeah.
I think that's in the end of the day why you go on a reality TV show, hey?
Yeah.
Would be to, it's to make a name for yourself. And that's a way to do it.
Yeah.
Ash, I want to know yours.
Yeah, okay. So I would love to go on Survivor.
Whoa.
I think just being able to test yourself in that environment and see if you really can outlast out in all the elements. I love the idea of that kind of challenge.
Wow.
I'd be totally useless at the whole social strategy side of the game and like trying to outwit people because that's just not in my skill set.
I love how you put all those the key words that make up Survivor there. Nice one.
Super fan. No, not really.
Oh, that's good. Can you make a fire?
I think with some practice, I could give it a crack.
Yep. Could you find some tapioca?
Sure, why not?
Season 1 for those who remember that one. I do remember that. I need to find some tapioca. That's all she could talk about. Nice one. Yeah, that'd be really
I'd love
cool.
to give that a try, but I also think Amazing Race would be so much fun and you get to see so many cool parts of the world.
Yeah, well, just don't have me as your buddy because I'll just be throwing up.
No, I need someone who could run and throw up at the same time.
Yeah. That was a really good question. Okay, well, I have come up with one because it was based on travel. Well, that relates to my answer for this question. Let's go back. So what is your favorite confectionery and why?
Oh, such a good question.
Yeah. Ed, do you want to go first?
Oh, I don't have much of a sweet tooth, but so I guess my answer is going to go away from being sweet. But I like 99% chocolate. So that's probably my level of confectionery. It's that beautiful bitter taste and great with coffee and So that's my confectionery of choice.
Oh, okay. So he likes the 99. Right. Okay. All right. Interesting. Oh,
okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So are we talking about categories of confectionery or one specific?
Could be a specific one because sometimes, there's something that really draws you in.
Yeah.
Yep.
I love a Malteser.
Malteser?
I can't go past a Malteser. Because they're, especially the ones that are with the extra chocolate around them now, because you've got like the thick layer of chocolate and then the nice malt center.
Yes.
And it's just a nice balance. And I also, when I go to the movies, I like to tip my Maltesers into the popcorn so you get like the mix of salty and sweet.
That's so cool. I've never heard anyone do that before.
Yeah. And
Great idea.
if the popcorn's warm, then it kind of takes, you get a little bit of melty chocolate on your popcorn.
Yep.
That's really good.
Was that your own invention? Or did someone sort of teach you that?
No, I don't think I can take credit for that one. I think that's, I would have heard about that elsewhere.
Okay. Well, you've heard it now on the Research Weeks podcast, guys.
But if we're going for like a other type, I think raspberry licorice is also really delicious as well.
Yum. Yeah, that's really cool.
So that's a cheat. 2 answers. Sorry.
Yeah, that was. But okay, you've got the chocolate category and the lolly category.
Yeah.
Okay, so the reason why mine relates to travel is because I love Snickers bars.
Oh.
Absolutely adore them. There's just something about that nougat and that peanut. And so I only ever really buy a Snickers bar when I travel. So it's like the last thing I buy at the shop. I get my water so I can have my quells. And then I always have a Snickers bar. And because I haven't traveled the last 2.5 years, I really haven't had much Snickers. So I just get like little cheats from, the favorites thing and I have that. So I'm not really having my full Snickers bar.
Yeah, bite size.
Yeah, bite size one. So when I next travel, I'll be buying probably 2 or 3 Snickers bars to make up for it.
Definitely.
That's mine. Yeah. That's my confectionery. Okay, Ed, have you got an ice? I'm a bit nervous.
I'm so nervous about this. This is the first time that Ed has been brought into the icebreaker
it has been.
realm.
I don't know what
and
this is going to
we
be
know
like.
he likes to ask a question, so I'm excited and nervous about this.
Yeah, same. Go, Ed.
I'm just as excited to find out. So I've been put on the spot, but I'm thinking, what if you had your own time machine? If you had you were Marty McFly, you picked up the DeLorean, and you had a chance to go back in time, either to view something or to change one particular thing. What would be your choice? Where would you go? What would you do?
You got me thinking about the butterfly effect now. So
I think I've got one in my head. Do you want to keep thinking or have you got one?
You go.
Okay. Well, mine goes back to travel again. I've obviously got traveling on my brain. I would travel back to 2019 to wherever it was where the coronavirus was born and I would just get rid of it. It's not that exciting, but I'm really over it. I'm really over the pandemic and it just seems to keep continuing. So look, we don't actually know the source properly yet. There's a lot of conspiracy theories around that. So I'd probably be a little bit lost, but I'd probably go to the lab and I'd also go to the marketplace and find a way to make sure those animals didn't meet and then we wouldn't get the virus.
Yeah.
That's mine.
It's the butterfly effect. You could make it worse though.
Oh gosh.
Is this a trick question, Ed?
Yeah, this does feel like it. Have you got one now, Ash?
I think I've got one. It's quite a selfish one, really.
It's okay.
I think I'd like to go back to, I don't know if it was the 60s or the 70s, like when all the really cool music festivals were around, like start of Woodstock and things like that, and Glastonbury, and just experience.
So you wouldn't change anything. You would just go back and make sure you don't
that's why I
affect
said
anything.
it was selfish, because I'd love to just go back and experience that time.
Yes, but you'd have to make sure no one knew you were there. Otherwise, you would really
I could change things.
You could.
Yeah.
Like, your parents might not meet.
That's true. Yeah.
Stuff like
so,
that.
yeah, you've got to be. So
be
I think
really
that's
careful.
far enough removed from my life that it shouldn't change anything materially. I hope. This hypothetical time machine that we're going in.
No, I like it. Yeah, I thought Woodstock would be great. Can you imagine being there?
Yeah.
Ed, where did this come from? What are you thinking?
I have to admit, I didn't really think too much about the answer, but I'm thinking that maybe I go all the way back to the beginning of time.
Oh.
Like, if I have a time machine and I can go anywhere I like, I want to see where it all started. Like, if you're a creationist and it's Adam and Eve in the garden, then I want to know, like, what happened when they ate the apple and they got kicked out of the garden. And if you're not a creationist, I want to know what happened with the Big Bang. What was before the Big Bang?
You really are getting the most value for money out of your time machine.
That's right. Because it'll affect all of time.
True enlightenment.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I knew I was nervous for that question because there's actually so much more to it than my Snickers bar.
Yeah. That just reminded me of dinosaurs, and I learnt a really fun fact.
Yes, what's that?
The other day, which I haven't fact checked.
Yeah.
But I'm prepared to put it out there.
Okay.
There is chronologically as much time between the Stegosaurus dinosaur and the Tyrannosaurus Rex as there is between the Tyrannosaurus Rex and the iPhone.
Get out.
Yeah.
Wow.
I thought they were friends. Well, not friends, like, T-Rex
roommates.
Steak.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. They were,
weren't actually
cohabiting.
Wow, they're not. Wow.
How crazy is that?
Did not know that. I thought that was all the same time.
Yeah. I couldn't tell you how much time that is, but I know it's a lot.
A lot of time. I like that fun fact.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need to, I don't even know how to fact check that. But we can fact check all the stuff we're about to talk about.
We can. We definitely can. And we have. And I think that is a nice way to move into the actual facts of the papers that we talked about this season so far. And like we said, pulling together, I suppose, the key themes and messages that we think, are the threads that tied all these episodes together.
Yes.
And when we did go through and look at who we'd spoken to and what we'd spoken to them about, I think, it was quite clear that there were probably three main things that came out across those episodes, weren't there?
Yep. And I love how mainly you did that because you're like a really good qualitative researcher where you can look at all the themes and categorize them. So I was really impressed how you did that. But I think, putting them together in that sort of context helps to bring in all the information because otherwise you can just listen to, new information at a time, but actually putting that all together, it's really helpful, isn't it, to have a framework?
Yeah. And I think it reinforces a lot of things that quite a few people spoke about across those episodes.
Yeah, it's really consistent evidence now. Like it's all building on top of each other, which is the whole point of research, right?
Yeah.
It's never in isolation.
Yeah.
Okay, well, what's the first theme?
So the first theme that we thought was really apparent in a lot of the episodes that we have had so far is the power of co-design.
I love it.
Right?
Yep.
And, it started with the very first episode of season 2 where we talked about our qualitative study.
Yep.
And, the experiences of families with locomotor training and their perspectives on that. And I think it's a really powerful message that if you involve consumers in the design of interventions, it ensures that, there's sustainability beyond just that research project, doesn't it?
Yeah. And it has to be about that. Otherwise, it's a bit of a waste of time. Like, you might find this great finding, but then is it applicable in the real world? Like, how do we translate it? Because they don't come. I think we can't take it for granted that one thing leads to another. There has to be a body of work that links it, and that co-design, the consumer involvement was key. Like I think putting all the locomotor training to practice now, which we do every day at Healthy Strides, for example, like all the principles, how we do it, how we communicate with families about it as well, how we schedule things in, was all based on everything they said.
Yeah. It's so powerful,
really
isn't
cool.
it?
Yeah. I really love that.
And I think it was really emphasised by our chats with Laura Miller about Envisage, and, that's such a beautiful example, again, of the power of co-design. And that is a huge research program that in every phase they have, treated consumers as equal research partners in the research process. And, that ensures that this program that they've designed really meets the needs of the people that they're working with, doesn't it?
Yeah. And so you're never really assuming that you know all things. And I actually think it takes the pressure off as a researcher to kind of feel like you need to know it.
Yes.
You're not expected to know it, but you need to know that the people who are going to be receiving the service, who've experienced it themselves, are going to be able to guide you on that. So that's why, particularly for Envisage, given how early diagnosis, that real early phase, we don't really want to get that wrong. No one sets out to get that wrong in that early part of it.
Yeah.
But what are the key things that we can do to help people in their journey?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, we spoke to Helen Burke-Taylor about healthy mothers, healthy families. And again, a really nice example of a program that is designed to support families through, some really difficult times and challenges that they come up against in their journey through, navigating the world of disability and therapy services and taking care of from a family perspective and a mum's perspective, taking care of themselves and valuing their health and well-being as much as that of the rest of their family.
Yeah.
And the power of that and how healthy mothers, as the title says, ultimately, lead to healthy families, and taking care of the mum or the primary caregiver is just as important as taking care of the children.
Yeah, I love that. I love how you summarize that. I think it's good knowing in anywhere in the world that these programs exist and that they're available. The research is evolving in that, but we have identified, we know this is something that we need to work on. We know that we need to be supporting people. We can now point people in the right direction as well. So I really like that.
Yeah. And again, reinforced by our chats with Hayley Passmore and the Reframe program for youth in juvenile detention with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. Really encouraging the people working with those youth to understand them and to take perspective in a way that's appropriate for them, and she worked a lot with the workers in those facilities to develop a program that met their needs and also met the needs of the youth as well. So I think, again, a really nice example of, how effective that can be.
And that training is now rolled out, all across Australia. I know she's been going to all different centres and now from an educational perspective, people want to use that framework to be able to support kids in school. So now that's had this translation effect. And I really loved how they broke everything down when you're really understanding like the neurodisability element of it and all the components and,
such again, practical examples.
Yeah, it was so good because the practicality was there because that's what they said they needed. To understand, to support and to treat, they needed all of that. So that was such a great episode.
I really like that one. And the other example I thought of, when we talk about the power of co-design was Ellen Armstrong's episode on functional electrical stimulation and how really you can incorporate the consumer voice in program delivery.
Yeah. I think that's a really good one, particularly for FES where, it's an uncomfortable stimulation feeling on your legs as well. And she had some great strategies of kind of going, this is what it might feel like. This is some words you can use around that as well. And it doesn't mean that you sort of throw everything out. You can have the strategies of how you can implement it in together as well. And I love how that actually, all the findings from that was very similar to the research that we had done in the qualitative as well. So again, it's just compounding, all the knowledge about, this is, if you want to deliver an intervention, these are the things that you really need to think about because they influence outcomes.
Yeah.
I really, really love it.
And I think that's, supported by Nadine Smith's episode where she described how to involve consumers in addressing important clinical issues. The focus of her paper and that project was pain and addressing pain for children with dyskinesia. But, designing an intervention that addresses a clinical need but is suitable for families. And that, I think often we have an intervention that we know to be effective and there's evidence to show that it's effective, but the way that works for a family, might not necessarily be a feasible intervention for a family. And if, for example, a movement intervention might be effective if you deliver it 3 times a week. That might not always be feasible for a family. So Nadine's was a really nice example of, something that can be delivered once a week. The families find that to be, suitable and feasible, and they actually showed some positive outcomes from that as well.
Yep.
So, you can tailor things to meet people's needs.
Yeah, and I love how she did that and how she spoke with the families about that need as well, because given the population she was working with, you've got to consider all the equipment and, the number of medical comorbidities that you may need to be treating.
Mm-hmm.
And what I loved about that is, yes, the once a week worked because it matched the goal as well.
Yes.
The goal wasn't developing a new functional skill, it was to address pain.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you don't have to do all that intervention if you're aiming for reducing pain.
Yeah.
And I think that just makes it so much more feasible. You feel like you can achieve it. Yeah, that was such a good one.
Yeah.
And I love the single subject research design from a perspective of any clinicians out there or researchers who want to explore an area. This is something that you can do. Very little money required in terms of grant funding. You can integrate into your practice.
Yeah.
It's a really, really good starting point that still gives you good, robust evidence.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think this also extends into assessment tools as well and how we can make them work best for the people who need the information. And Paula Chagas's episode where we talked about her work developing the GMFM family report, I think was a beautiful example of this.
I love that. It was so good.
Yeah.
And I can't wait for that to come out. The number of people have been asking, when does it come out? I'm like, well, they said end of the year and I can't wait because I think it's something that we as clinicians really want. So they've really heard that part of it. They've heard what families really want. And in light of all things pandemic and telehealth, well, they found an alternative, which I think will last.
Yeah. And a beautiful example of an evidence-based way of modifying a tool to suit your needs.
I really like that. So there's a lot there in terms of co-design. You can see that a lot of the research papers that we've spoken about have all really adopted that, and that speaks to the success of the paper and the outcomes. Question over to you, Ed, because we are including you in this all the way throughout now, just for this episode.
Don't get too excited.
Yeah, that's right. What do you think about co-design? I mean, co-design seems to be a word that we're using a lot at the moment. It's definitely a hot word when it comes to research. But it describes something we've always been wanting to do anyway, involving people, in a way that matters. What do you think about all that?
I have to admit, I'm a little surprised that it's kind of a buzzword. I would have assumed that it's kind of part and parcel of the process. I mean, I'm currently towards the very end of an ICT degree, and everything about that I'm studying programming. Everything about that is very user focused. So the co-design part of an app designer or an app developer and its key target audience and demographic, that information goes back and forth so often that it helps the entire process and helps the application grow and kind of fulfill the need that it needs to be. So I'm just kind of really surprised that it's kind of a hot buzzword. I don't quite understand how it would have functioned without families' input.
Yeah, and I think originally it probably, in the early science, when you're trying to find the early science, that's probably what it was. And the actual application of it now, just, I think it's been increased recognition that that's where research needs to head.
Yeah, and I think historically, perhaps people found it quite daunting to they're keen to make sure that it's done in a really authentic way, and perhaps there was a bit of nervousness about doing that properly and making sure people are acknowledged correctly for their contribution to the co-design process. But I think champions like Anne McKenzie, and who does such a beautiful job of empowering researchers to feel confident, to involve people in their research, and also empowering consumers to feel confident in being involved in research. That there's lots of work going on in this area, which means it is easier to implement.
Yeah, absolutely. I think having champions like that have really pushed it forward as being the key, because the last thing you want is for it to be a token involvement where it's a tick box exercise because the funding grant said you needed to involve consumers. Well, that's not really authentic. But there are skills that are required to make them authentic, and there's courses that you can do, and Anne McKenzie teaches that. I know you've done a lot of that, haven't you?
Yeah.
So I think it's, it is a skill, but it's something that really highlights this is the other end of it, what it looks like at the other end. Yeah.
And it's, ultimately a sustainability tool.
That's right.
Yep. I think another key theme that, speaking of tools, another key thing that came out, and we just touched on it briefly with Paula Chagas's episode, is the importance of measurement and understanding what you're measuring and why.
Yeah.
And, I think there were a few episodes that we covered this in. So I thought we could kind of, wrap all that up together in a nice little package.
Yeah. I like that. I think the thing about measurement is always being able to distinguish what you're measuring, like you said. So there's, I always have to think about what they all mean, but they do make sense once you really think it through. So there's performance, capacity, and capability.
Yep.
And I think that there's the setting, within research, you really want to measure capacity because you want to be quite standardized, right? You want to have the setting quite, the same so that you can really truly compare from one condition to another in a very true way.
Yeah.
And
capacity helps you to control as many things as you can, I guess.
Right.
So that,
you
can tease out that one thing that you're looking for a change in.
That's right. Right. And I think knowing capacity, if you can increase capacity, like we talk about our own capacity, if we want to increase that, the whole idea is that we increase our resources to be able to perform a particular activity.
Yeah.
So even though you might just be able to do it in a very controlled environment, you've shown that you can do it. The translation then becomes whether you can do that in everyday life, and that's performance.
Yes. Yeah. So performance, what someone actually does in their current environment in the context that they would normally do it in. And, Paula talked about I really enjoyed the conversation with Paula where she discussed, that kids would come into they do their hospital walk in hospital and,
that's right.
when they're being assessed and, that might kind of be an indication of capacity or capability, but not necessarily performance. And ultimately what we're trying to change is performance, right?
That's right. It doesn't have to be done perfectly. The whole idea is that children can do what they want to meet their needs and their goals. And so
when they want to.
That's right. And so we need to be able to measure that. So and I love, again, going back to Paula Chagas again, is that because of the tools designed the way it is and the family's inputs there, we can standardize the assessment of that. You are measuring performance. So you've got a better idea of like what's actually happening at home and do they have the right equipment to support them? Because they might not have all the standardized bars at certain heights for them to do things at home. So what does that actually look like?
Yeah.
Loved that. I really, really liked that one.
Simon Garbellini's episode, we covered the importance of classification tools and their place in clinical practice.
Yes.
And so I think, we have this really nice combination of assessment and classification tools telling us about how different factors contribute to a child's function.
Yep.
And, help us to determine different intervention pathways, right?
Yeah, I really like that. I think we always need to know our classifications. I think there are a lot out there, but the whole idea of that is to help to streamline our communication and also give us a starting point of where we can start to treat. And I love how Simon developed, the hand deformity scales that we could actually look at, where they might be at, what interventions you might do. And for anyone new coming into the profession or might not be seeing as many children with cerebral palsy, for example, this just tells you where you can start and, some treatments you can do, some assessments that you can relate to. And I really like how that's really structured. And that related also to, I was thinking about Magnus as well, Magnus Pullman's article about the MRI classification scale. I didn't know about the MRI one. But that again just tells you the mechanism of injury or the area of injury and how that relates to potentially ASD and ADHD and things that you might better put to your practice early as well.
Yeah. And what a beautiful example of, such a detailed registry that they have over there in Sweden and just the richness of information that he was able to pull together to inform that classification. It's such valuable information, isn't it? It makes a real difference to the families that they're working with.
It absolutely does. And I think from there, in terms of how we could use it, I mean, the whole idea is if we can incorporate more of these classification tools and assessment tools in our communication with each other as clinicians, then we can make that journey a whole lot smoother for the children that we work with and their families. Because then they don't have to be telling everyone, look, there was this part of the brain that was affected and this is what's happened as a result and function. This is what we see and the hand does this. And, we can ease that by having these tools to use. And that's the whole idea, right, of how we can communicate.
So would you say it's like standardizing communication?
Yeah, I think so. I know I definitely start all of our reports that way, is to sort of really lay the foundation of it. And, in the old old days, our reports would be really long because we'd be describing in sitting they do this and they do this and they do this. But imagine, when you have the GMFFRs that you can say, exactly where they're standing with that, and you go, okay, I've got a picture in my head. It fleshes out the GMFCS a bit more. The MAX, we can flesh it out a whole lot more with the hand deformity assessment tool. And then with the MRIs as well, you can sort of put all that information in there, and it just gives you a really standardized way to then justify why you're doing what you're doing. And I think we need to be, as health professionals, that is our responsibility to pull that all together, because then it gives the reason of why we're doing what we're doing. Like it has to come back down to that.
I love that. And then, on the subject of assessment tools, we had Corin's, beautiful episode on helping us to understand the journey of, firstly a PhD, but also how to develop an evidence base for new assessment tools as they become available. Technology is constantly evolving and there's constantly new ways of being able to assess and understand children's movement and function, but it's making sure that you use those in an evidence-based way. And if there is no evidence base for them yet, how you might start to develop that. I think that was a really nice example of how you might go about it.
It really was. I would echo that as well. The PhD journey was definitely, a tricky one because of all the development that needed to happen. A great example of what a multidisciplinary team looks like. You need to have tech involved as well, and
engineers.
My goodness, so much to coordinate. So amazing work by Corin. But I really, really enjoyed the fact that they looked at technology and looked at sensors and not just, I feel like we always think that technology is going to solve all our problems. I think they'll be great without the whole, takeover, of course, like the Terminator. You want technology to help you, but sometimes it's not where it needs to be just yet. And we need to validate them. So I loved how that episode then talked about, if you're in the market for looking at technology and investing into sensors, just know that there are pitfalls in these areas. They could be used for this, but again, coming back down to the goal of why, because otherwise you're not really capturing if the sensors aren't accurate enough, you're not capturing the change that might be being made, or you're overestimating the change that's being made, and you're not pursuing something else that'd be more effective.
You took the words right out of my mouth. It comes back to that point of understanding what you're measuring and why you're measuring it. You still have to have, technology, like you say, technology is not going to do that for you. So you still need to have that understanding, don't you?
So I think there's a lot there in terms of tech. I know, Ed, you had a lot to say when it came to all things tech as well. But I guess in terms of measurement and classification, you've had a bit of a big lesson on that. We've talked about a fair bit there.
Look, there's definitely like a lot there that I had kind of heard for the first time, and understanding classification scales. I'm not in the healthcare space, so it's a little difficult to follow at times, but I appreciate that a lot of work goes into these sorts of things that gives therapists and professionals the tool set that they need to move forward. And you touched on tech, and it's kind of interesting that a lot of people kind of look at tech to solve the problems, but a lot of it is a black box. And there's a lot of stuff that kind of hides behind a curtain where some things just kind of get automated, where you think there's a genuine process involved in it, like with sensors. Some of these algorithms just kind of predict the movement as opposed to actually log the X, Y, and Z coordinates of the movement itself. So it takes a lot to kind of use tech in the way that you want it to work, and maybe it's not quite there for some of the things that some professionals kind of assume that the tech is capable of. So it's an interesting and emerging field, I guess.
And they go hand in hand. Like it just shows the power. All the classification tools and the assessments we just spoke about are based on observation of people who either one of families that know their children really well, or professionals like, OTs and physios and doctors who can look at something with their own clinical experience, glean from that, and then give it an assessment number. Like you can't do it in isolation. There is that skill that you can develop over time.
And I think, we're constantly reminded of the best practice principles to improve function in cerebral palsy. That was something else that was really evident to me when I looked through our episodes. And we talked about, back in season 1, towards the end of season 1, we spoke to Michelle Jackman, who was the lead author on the International Clinical Practice Guidelines.
Yep.
And so I think, throughout season 2, there's been lots of really nice examples of how you actually implement those in research and in practice.
Yep. Yeah, I think that episode with Michelle Jackman and going through each of the recommendations was so great, wasn't it? It really set the foundation. I know that relates a lot to cerebral palsy, but it does relate to a lot of cerebral palsy-like conditions or neurodisabilities of broader term.
Yep.
Because they were really practical. They're really top-down principles that are really supported by research, and I think we can feel really confident what they are. But I like how over the episodes we've teased it out. So goal setting sounds so very simple, but it is so important.
Yeah. And Georgina Clutterbuck's episode where we talked about goal setting and practicing the whole goal in a real life context, coming back to that idea of performance.
That's right.
That's so important. And her paper was a really beautiful demonstration of, the impact of that.
Yeah. And that episode sticks with me a fair bit. I remember the comment that she made about, why the sports stars are so important, because so many of our children do spend so much time in therapy, particularly in the early days. And they're great to build capacity. But the actual ability to execute that in terms of a performance in real life context was missing.
Yeah.
And they missed out on those beautiful opportunities to be part of sporting groups and learn those, basic skills of working with others as well that, are actually really important. And so if you think about performance, if you're having a session at the park, there is great value in that. If you're having a session with the park with more friends, there's even greater value in that.
Yeah.
Like it's really worthwhile saying that that's a really important intervention, right?
Yes. And it, always comes back to that pearl that, kids don't do therapy to get good at therapy, right?
Yep. That's one of my favorite lines, I'd say, because you could be a therapy expert. And I can stand on one leg in this environment really, really well. But I have trouble walking over obstacles when I'm out and about, and that limits me. I think that was a really good one from Georgina. I really loved it.
We've talked about working together as part of a team and clinicians being able to share knowledge about evidence-based interventions, which is another one of those best practice principles.
Yes.
And I think it was covered really nicely in Anna Tavelde's episode.
Yeah, that was such a great episode, wasn't it? Like that. And I know that episode's been listened to a lot. It's one of our highest listened to episodes because I think there's a lot to learn from that. And I think people are really keen and interested to know where the evidence is at with that. But the point of that, again, wasn't the one person's opinion. It was really, it was a really robust methodology that looked at studies from a long time ago as well, and really tried to pull all that together.
Yeah, multiple sources of information and being able to, like you say, pull that together and provide information about evidence.
Yeah,
right?
That's right. And I like how we sort of teased, we spent some time teasing out what those principles of motor learning that create neuroplasticity are. And that was sort of backed by the conversation that we had with Sarah Reedman and Leanne Saksishki about Habitil as well.
Yes.
So they're all kind of really related in terms of what does motor learning principles and neuroplasticity principles actually look like, because you can kind of skew it a bit if you're not careful, because you can try to match things up that way. But they were really good at teasing it out.
Yes, and that it's, not just the repetition, that constant repetition, which, makes sense from a neuroplasticity perspective, but there's so many other components to that too. And again, relating back to our best principles, things like goal setting, and the salience of what you're trying to work on, it being fun, being able to transfer what you're learning into the performance kind of context, and being able to do it in real life the way that you would do it at home or at school or at the park with your friends is so important.
It is. And I like how they really broke down the difference then from a whole task and a part task practice. The ideal is the whole task because that's transference. And if you're going to go part task, it has to be directly related to the goal, not breaking it down to a single body structure and function impairment, but really still looking at the activity level that's going to make sense in the performance of the activity. Yeah. And I like that we were able to talk about that. And the whole salience part of it. We spoke about how, how can you tell if someone's actually enjoying themselves? And it's the basics, like they're having fun, they're laughing, they're talking to their therapist, they want to be there.
They're motivated to do it.
Yeah, that's right. Because being motivated to do it is actually a really key component of learning a new skill.
Yeah.
We all know what it's like if you've got a bad attitude learning something, you're like, oh my gosh.
It feels like a chore.
It is absolutely a chore. When you're rote learning something for an exam, for example, you don't 100%. Really remember at the end of it. But if you actually put it in a context of how this is meaningful, you do learn that and it sticks with you for a much longer period of time. Hey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can, all of the units I did at university that I felt really passionately about. I can, I could tell you so much about those.
Yes.
The ones that I, like you say, that you rote learn and it is a chore to learn things about. As soon as you leave that exam, you forget it all.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And things that don't make sense to you. So if you have a really good teacher, like we can all think of as great teachers, right? That would teach you something but give you a good context for it. And then you go, oh, I get why I need to learn this now. It makes sense for me. But if you teach me something that's a bit too far removed from it, but you don't give me context, I'm not interested and I don't remember it.
You've lost me.
There's so many things that I like that. And I think we need to remember that our children learn in exactly the same way. Things that work for us are things that may work for them as well. And the language of children is kind of, fun. I mean, it should be for all of us, but, but it's fun and meaning. Like there has to be that. So, they sound simple, but again, they have a lifelong impact. Like you still remember things like that.
Yeah, for sure. And the importance of good teachers, like you say, is so I could, I didn't know anything about biomechanics until my second year biomechanics units. And I had the most brilliant lecturer, Jackie Alderson. She's probably not listening. Shout out.
Yes.
She was the best teacher I ever had.
Wow.
She just knew how to explain things brilliantly and broke it down and gave such, appropriate context for what we were learning that it made it easy.
I love that. So I want to go on that a bit more because I think that just, for me, I've got a light bulb moment here of like in terms of how it works, right? So when we're talking about really part tasks, because one of my questions to Sarah was like, how part is part? She's like, that's true because we talk about part, but if you break it down too much into a small increment that doesn't make sense, you're not going to remember it.
Yeah.
And then you're always reliant on someone to show you that. So in the instance of biomechanics, if you don't really get that in a context and a way it's taught in a meaningful way, you're going to be reliant on that person to explain it to you every single time. Yeah. And it's really annoying for that person. I'm sure. Explain it to me again. I feel like I do that to statisticians all the time. If I can't quite get it, I'm like, you need to explain that to me again.
Yeah.
But the reason why you've identified her as a good teacher is because she taught it in a way that met your needs, in a way that you could apply it.
Yes.
And then her job then is done because you're not completely reliant on her. So the owner Novak's whose brain is doing the work comes back down to that.
Absolutely.
Right. It's transferring it.
Another pearl.
I loved that one. I think there's a lot to glean from all of that. And I really enjoy those conversations.
Yeah. I think, talking about clinicians sharing knowledge and about their learnings as well also reminds me of our conversation with Taylor Penny.
Oh, yes.
Back at the start of season 2.
Yes.
When we talked about, the RAP models and, it was a little bit out of our comfort zone and our area of expertise, but, she did a beautiful job of explaining it to us. And I think that episode for me highlights how important it is, firstly that clinicians are aware of what's happening in the wider scientific field. You don't have to be an expert in it, but, have enough information to hand that you can, there will be families asking questions and you can at least point them in the right direction for the evidence base and where they can go to get reliable information on things that might be of interest and relevant to them. Yeah,
I think you've hit the nail on the head for that one because I think in terms of the amount of information that's out there, families will be subjected to that, but so will we. Yeah. If it's an area that we're not really familiar with, we'll get pulled in exactly the same way because they'll use like some websites might be a lot more sexy and they'll have more nicer graphics and use words that really will pull you in.
Yep.
But you really need to have that discerning voice and in the early days when there's more vulnerability as well, if we're looking at cord blood, what's this mean? Where's the state of the evidence at? Well, if we know what that is as our role as experts to know at least where the evidence is sitting or where to point people in the right direction, then you're going to spend less time in that wastage period, aren't you? Like just looking for things that might not match. And
and dedicating all the time and energy to that where, you can direct them and shine a spotlight on those places they can go for the evidence.
And there were a lot of big words in that episode, I remember. And she did such a good job explaining them because I was like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
But my take home from that was, it's like an anti-inflammatory for the brain. That's when you think about what you're trying to do in that early phase and the different phases of it. I really, really like that.
Yeah, she made something that, felt really daunting at the start seem much more relatable by the end.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. And there's
hats off to Taylor for that.
There. Yeah, she did such a good job.
And, when we're talking about best practice principles, I think, and clinical guidelines, I think, what I'm really excited about, and we talked about it in our chat with Mark Peterson, are these clinical guidelines for adults that he kind of alluded to and left a bit of an Easter egg for us.
He did, didn't he?
Yeah.
It's good to know that's coming. I think what a big job. My goodness, there's obviously going to be so much there to do. And it's still the thing that really catches me out with that particular episode when I told people about it is the fact that he has to justify to GPs that you can be an adult with cerebral palsy, you don't grow out of it.
That is burnt into my brain.
Same. I still remember that gasp moment that we both had. But that just shows why it's so important to have clinical guidelines and to know that they're there because there's so much education and as health professionals, we can never assume we know it all. And, most of us already know that, but it's good to know that there's people with expertise in different areas that can help us. And for people in the adult area, watch this space.
Yeah. And I think that episode with Mark really highlighted the transition from childhood to adulthood and the challenges that can bring for families and people with disabilities.
Yeah.
And, my key take home from that, I think we all kind of know it anecdotally, but it's not always put down on paper for us is the focus on mental as well as physical health.
Yeah, that's right. And I like how that sort of related back to even Nadine when she was talking about pain and she kept saying it's not okay. Like it's not okay to
just
be
because
in pain.
You live with it doesn't make it okay.
That's
or
right.
normal.
Yeah, that's right. And that message needs to be spoken about so much more because the impact that has on that person in terms of their mental health.
Yeah.
The link that had to all the psychological morbidity was really disturbing.
Yeah.
And more needs to be done, obviously, in that area. But, it starts with identifying it and then you can try to find solutions from it.
Yeah. And I think Mark's other key message was it has to start early.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And, we need to do more early and often to support this really strong sense of self for children and for families. And ultimately that enables them to be really strong advocates for themselves as they go through these phases of transition and move into services where there might not be as much awareness around their the challenges that they face.
Yeah. And I think that comes down to an area I know where we're both really interested in is physical activity. There are, when you're thinking about what that looks like, it'll look different across the different levels of functional mobility. But the point is we're trying to find ways to be as physically active as we can because and be included, because those things do actually have a big impact on all the things that Mark was talking about. You're kind of like it's
mental and physical health. If we're talking about that, I think, being active is one of the key things that we can do to really make a difference in both of those areas of health.
Yeah, I think so too. I love everything about best clinical practice guidelines. I think it just embodies so much work that has been done and puts it in a place where it's, if you want to know the state of the evidence, this is where you look to because it's really summarized high quality level research and it's a really reliable source. Ed, what do you think about all things when it relates to best practice guidelines?
That's a big question. I'm not sure professionals in healthcare would care too much about what the star of the Tell It to Ed segment would think about these things. I'm about to take over the show, so I've had a few more minutes this episode than in others.
The foot is firmly wedged in the door.
Yeah. That's right.
Look, the evidence-based practice. I'm trying to think of like that definition that takes in the three parts of it. It's the
Yeah.
You'll have to help me out with
what
this.
Andrew Whitehouse brought, like the definition of evidence-based practice isn't just the scientific empirical evidence. It's looking at the values of people who are the consumers as well as clinical expertise.
Yeah. So I think any of those things in isolation, and even to a layperson like myself, it doesn't make any sense to take any one of those in isolation. And even 2 out of the 3 don't quite give you the full picture. And just pure common sense would tell you that there is so much worth in making sure that you've got like values and information and all that from each one of those 3 segments that kind of makes up the best evidence-based practice. And I'm surprised that clinicians and other professionals would rely on any one part of that trio, even 2 out of the 3. Like, given that, obviously, with researchers like yourselves, it can be very difficult to get a hold of that research information, and I appreciate that. For people who don't have a university affiliation, maybe they don't get access to all those journals and books and articles and that. Yeah. But I'd like to think that there are places that you can get a hold of that information. And obviously, we're trying to do our best over the course of 50-odd episodes to try to highlight some of those things in this field. But I can see that it's such an important part that really should be part and parcel of the entire process of any clinician or researcher's work.
I like that you brought it back down to the actual definition of evidence-based practice.
Yeah.
It actually
tying all the threads together.
Actually really does. It's probably the part that, when you think about how that all works, I think that it's so true because, you can't rely just on one. Clinical expertise, for example, is what we've got. It's what's in our hands. It's there. It's powerful, really important. You couple that with knowledge and the evidence, which these best practice guidelines do allow us to have. And then the whole power of co-design, talking to families about what it is that they want, what's valuable to them. You put that together, you've got evidence-based practice. Yeah.
And I think, when we're talking about evidence-based practice and evidence for why we're doing what we do and guidance that we might be providing to families or anyone, in the community, I think we can look at all of that through the lens of Ben Jackson's episode.
That's one of my favorites.
Which I think ultimately is an overarching guide for how to effectively communicate with people, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I listen to that episode all the time because there's so many pearls of wisdom there. Great voice as well, as I've heard lots of comments about how good his voice is. Look, I think he spoke a lot about, just goal setting and the power of that and the expectation effect that is put alongside that.
Yep.
And then the two-sided messaging, I can't get past that, which is sort of coupled with the inoculation theory.
Yeah.
And you kind of think, okay, it's really important to know what else is out there.
Yep.
Acknowledge it, give people credit for that, but then to refute it and to sort of say, look, actually the evidence is much stronger in this area, but you don't just drum in one side of that.
Yeah, because that can have the opposite effect to what you're intending.
Yep. And that whole, the trait, we all have our own tendencies to, you tell me this and I'll go right against it. I'm going to prove you wrong.
Reactance and all those things. Yeah.
Yep. And I just liked how he sort of laid all of that out. There's so many tools there.
Yep. And, we learned about some powerful weapons of influence, but ultimately, one of the most powerful things is just to be kind and be likable and communicate in a really, open, honest and kind way.
Yep. And the soft skills basically is what really highlighted that. We can have the knowledge. We all talk about bedside manner. We know what that looks like and feels like when you have that experience. But if you can communicate that in a sensitive way, understanding where people are at, knowing that and understanding their perspective.
Yep.
He spoke a lot about, taking the perspective of another person.
Yep.
And to some tools about that might be to, sort of reflect on what someone said right there and then. So you actually understand that person's perspective rather than walking away and going, well, I'll let them digest on that for the next week. And,
lecture them. And
that's right. That's right. So I really liked how he did that. And the weapons of influence are, there's lots of things there to take home. But at the end of the day, I think we are trying to communicate what our knowledge, communicate what's out there. And we need to be careful because you can take it down a direction where people might feel compelled they have to do something.
Yes. And they just don't have the resources or the capacity at that time to be able to take that on. And then they end up feeling guilty that they this is something that should be really important, is really important from this conversation. I feel like I should be doing this, but I just don't have the time or the resources to be able to make that happen.
Yep.
And they come away feeling really guilty.
Yep. You've got to read the situation. I like how he said in that episode, you might not have to fix it in that one instance. It's building that relationship, and you've got time.
Yeah.
And then you can help people through that decision-making process. And it goes back to envisage. It goes back to healthy mothers, healthy families when they do have phases of, of grief or information seeking phase. And then they've got this, there's different phases that you do go through.
Yep.
Acknowledge that and try to fit in with that and help people out that way.
Yeah. And ultimately the power of people and social networks and social support is so important. And, I think, again, reinforced by Envisage and Healthy Mothers, Healthy Families and all of the other, components of co-design that we talked about. That's something, the power of people is something that has come up repeatedly in anything that is co-designed with families. They thrive on that support.
That's right, yeah. So they seem, again, I think I say this a lot, but it seems simple. But if you are doing those things and providing support, helping build those connections, listening, and then guiding them along the way, that is best practice. You're doing it.
Yep.
And all we're trying to do here is go, okay, there's new things that might be coming about. There might be better ways that we can do it. It'll make time more efficient for us, more effective, better outcomes. And that's just the whole point of just gradually building on that knowledge.
Yep.
Yeah.
So hopefully,
I like that.
Yeah, I think that's ended on a really beautiful note, and some reflections for our listeners who have gone on this journey with us through season 2 so far. There's still more to come.
Yeah.
Things that you can take away and start to implement in your day-to-day practice.
Yeah, love it. Absolutely love it. Well, thank you so much for listening so far. We can't wait for the next part. We'll be back in September. So stay tuned. We've already got a lot of great episodes lined up, some amazing researchers that we've been so keen to talk to.
Yeah.
So we've got them all lined up, ready to go. So we can't wait to share that with you. And remember, if you want to go back to any of the back catalogue, there's a lot there now to listen to.
Yeah. What is it? 59 episodes?
Something like that. Yeah. That's really cool.
Yeah.
That's really, really cool. So hopefully this episode helps to bring it all together, and you can go back and listen to all the other ones as well for more detail. So remember to head to our website, researchworks.net, which has them all listed out there, links to all the researchers and to the papers, and a CPD form there to help you with collating all that information as well.
Yeah, but we will, say goodbye to you for now.
Yes.
And we really look forward to speaking to you again after our break. And I'm looking forward to hearing about all the restaurants that Dana's going to.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I'm going on holiday. If you haven't gathered that, I'm about to travel and I'm going to get my Snickers bar, maybe 3 or 4. And we'll have a good chat about all of that when we come back.
Yeah.
Chat to you guys all soon. Take care, guys. Bye.
Bye.